The phantom time hypothesis, the 1,000-year blackout. Imagine if history, as we know it, is fundamentally flawed, not by omission but by deliberate fabrication. The phantom time hypothesis, while controversial, posits a chilling possibility that a powerful cabal, involving medieval political and religious authorities, intentionally manipulated the dating system, adding approximately 300 years to the timeline, effectively erasing a millennium of true history. The claim is that the years between 614 AD and 911 AD never truly happened as documented. Why would the global elite commit such a massive historical fraud? The motive is the ultimate power play, legitimization and control. By moving the calendar forward, the ruling powers, specifically the Holy Roman Empire, the Catholic Church, and allied royal houses, could instantly age their dynasties, making their rule appear rooted in deeper, more divine, and more continuous history than actually existed. It allowed them to retrofit historical events to suit their political and religious narrative, solidifying their power structure by literally creating the past they needed to justify their present. Our investigation begins by looking at the evidence cited by the proponents of this theory. They point to three core pillars of suspicion. 1. The calendar anomaly. The supposed shift from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar in 1582, arguing that the need to correct a few missing days served as the perfect cover for inserting centuries of non-existent time. 2. Archaeological silence. A noticeable lack of robust, datable archaeological evidence for structures and cultural shifts across Europe and the Middle East during the supposed 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries AD, a period often referred to by proponents as the Dark Ages. 3. Historical forgery. The sudden suspicious appearance of vast amounts of forged documents and new historical texts during the Carolingian Renaissance, c. 800 AD, which served to fill the historical gap and legitimize the newly aged ruling dynasties. This series will dive into the specific individuals and institutions, from powerful popes to ambitious emperors, who had the motive and the means to execute the largest historical conspiracy in human history. We will trace the financial, political, and religious benefits gained from the Great Timeline Adjustment, revealing how the current world order is built on a foundation of historical fraud. The calendar deception, the real reason for the Gregorian reform. The cornerstone of the phantom time hypothesis, Part 1, rests on the official narrative surrounding the implementation of the Gregorian calendar in 1582. While the public explanation that the Julian calendar had accrued too many errors causing the date of Easter to drift is plausible on the surface, proponents of the conspiracy argue that this reform served as the perfect, scientifically justifiable cover for a far more sweeping historical fraud, the solidification of the phantom centuries, and the final erasure of the true past. The key figure in the official narrative is Pope Gregory XIII. In 1582, he issued the papal bull Inter Gravissimus, which decreed the deletion of 10 days from the calendar. This was justified as necessary to correct the accumulated error since the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. However, conspiracy theorists ask a critical question. If the Julian calendar truly had an error rate of about 11 minutes per year, how did the accumulated error jump from a few hours in 325 AD to 10 full days by 1582 AD? The necessary accumulation would imply a far greater period of time than the official history suggests. Proponents argue that the primary architects of the timeline fabrication were powerful figures from the Carolingian era, specifically Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester that, who sought to align their rule with the Christian concept of a significant date, such as the year 1000 AD, to legitimize the newly established Holy Roman Empire. To successfully age their dynasties and historical narratives, they allegedly invented hundreds of years of fictitious history and inserted them into the record. This means that the Gregorian reform in the 16th century was not a correction of a small solar error, but the final institutionalized cover-up, a mathematical validation of the centuries of fabricated history inserted earlier. If, as the hypothesis suggests, hundreds of years were added during the Carolingian period, c. 800–1000 AD, then the actual error in the calendar by 1582 AD should have been far larger than 10 days. They mathematically justified the accepted but false length of the historical period, making it impossible for later generations to successfully question the timeline without seeming to reject basic astronomical principles. The conspiracy highlights the fact that the church and the ruling elite held absolute power over the concept of time itself. By controlling the official measurement of history through the calendar, they controlled the narrative of legitimacy, ensuring that their own power structures appeared ancient and inevitable, while simultaneously erasing periods of true history that might have contradicted their dominance. The Gregorian reform, therefore, was not merely an astronomical correction, but the completion of the grand timeline adjustment. The Carolingian forged documents, false emperors, and the birth of the Dark Ages. If the Gregorian reform, Part 2, was the final seal on the historical deception, the Carolingian era, roughly the 8th to 10th centuries AD, represents the actual forge where the phantom time, Part 1, was physically inserted into the historical record. Proponents of the hypothesis argue that this period, often romanticized as the Carolingian Renaissance, was, in reality, a massive, coordinated effort by powerful ecclesiastical and secular leaders, primarily Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II, Gerbert of Aurillac, to manufacture a lineage, solidify papal power, and fill the several centuries they had allegedly fabricated. The motive was deeply political and religious. Otto III, seeking to revive the glory of the Roman Empire and establish a unified Christian European dominion, needed a history that stretched back deep into antiquity to legitimize his title as Holy Roman Emperor. Pope Sylvester II, a highly educated scholar and influential figure, provided the intellectual tools. By creating the Phantom Centuries, roughly 614 AD to 911 AD, they effectively accelerated history, making their own period appear to be the glorious continuation of an ancient tradition, rather than a relatively new, fragile power structure. The fabrication was executed through the mass production of forged documents and artifacts. Central to this conspiracy is the sudden appearance of key historical texts and foundational documents that supposedly originated in the Phantom Centuries, but exhibit striking similarities in language, style, and dating techniques to documents from the 10th and 11th centuries. A critical piece of evidence cited is the donation of Constantine, a famously forged Roman imperial decree that purported to transfer authority over Rome and the western part of the Roman Empire to the Pope. While historians generally agree this document is a fraud, phantom time proponents argue that the forgery wasn't just to steal land, but to retroactively establish the political dominance of the papacy during the fabricated centuries, thus lending divine legitimacy to the emperor's subsequent alliance with the church. Furthermore, proponents point to the architectural anomaly, a noticeable lack of datable, high-quality, large-scale structures built across Europe during the purported 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. The core of the phantom time raises serious questions. Instead, grand structures and the explosion of intellectual activity, often attributed to the Carolingian Renaissance, suddenly appear in the late 10th and 11th centuries, suggesting that the historical figures and events credited with building the Dark Ages were merely fictional constructs used to bridge the time gap. In essence, the proponents claim that the Carolingian Renaissance was a historical reboot. The elites of the late 10th century did not revive a collapsed civilization. They invented the collapse and the subsequent revival by inserting non-existent centuries, thereby giving themselves instant historical depth and unchallenged authority. They created the Dark Ages as a convenient historical vacuum, a period where any lack of evidence could be dismissed as lost to chaos, while simultaneously providing the backdrop necessary for their own triumphant rise to power as saviors of the continent. The missing evidence, the archaeological silence of the Phantom Centuries. The most unsettling argument supporting the phantom time hypothesis, parts 1-3, does not rely on forged documents or calendar mathematics, but on silence, the striking archaeological and numismatic vacuum that persists across Central and Western Europe during the period allegedly inserted into history, the so-called Phantom Centuries, roughly 614 AD to 911 AD. Yet the evidence tells a different story. Archaeologists rely on stratified layers of human activity, pottery analysis, and datable materials to piece together the past. In numerous excavations, artifacts datable to the 6th century AD are frequently found immediately below layers containing artifacts clearly datable to the 10th century AD, creating a historical discontinuity that critics find impossible to explain away merely as the result of chaos or migration. This archaeological silence extends dramatically to numismatics, the study of coins. During the supposed Phantom Centuries, the consistent, widespread minting and circulation of datable coinage across large swathes of Europe appears to have drastically diminished or virtually ceased when compared to the preceding Merovingian era or the subsequent Ottonian period. While economic decline could account for a reduction, the proponents argue that the extent of the gap is consistent with a period that simply did not exist in the historical progression. If there were sophisticated emperors, thriving monastic orders, and continuous political conflict for 300 years, where are the millions of coins they would have minted and lost? The grand stone-built structures and infrastructure associated with powerful, centralized empires, churches, fortresses, and permanent roads, are rare, small, or extremely difficult to date precisely to the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. When the archaeological record does finally become rich again, around the late 10th century, the surge in building styles, techniques, and complexity is often so sudden and advanced that it suggests a compressed rather than continuous period of development. This bolsters the claim that the Carolingian dynasty's achievements were retroactively stretched across the fabricated time. The proponents conclude that the official history uses the convenient term, the Dark Ages, as a blanket excuse to cover this glaring archaeological deficit. The lack of evidence is not due to historical loss or backwardness. It is because the period in question was invented to provide the necessary temporal gap. The empty soil, the missing coins, and the unbuilt cathedrals are, paradoxically, the strongest physical evidence that the global elite succeeded in their ambitious project to erase a millennium of real history and replace it with a narrative designed to perpetually legitimize their inherited power. The Byzantine Complicity, how Constantinople aided the historical fraud. While the primary blame for executing the grand timeline adjustment, parts 1-4, is often placed on the ambitious leaders of the Western Church, the papacy, and the burgeoning Holy Roman Empire, the Carolingians, the conspiracy could not have succeeded without the complicity or convenient silence of the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople, being the historical, cultural, and administrative continuity of the old Roman Empire, held vast archives, sophisticated scholars, and an unbroken tradition of historical record-keeping. If centuries were truly fabricated in the West, why did the East, a frequent rival, not immediately expose the fraud? The proponents of the phantom time hypothesis argue that the Byzantine Empire, far from being an innocent victim or an unwitting observer, had its own powerful motives for either participating in or strategically overlooking the timeline manipulation. The period of the alleged Phantom Centuries, roughly 614 AD to 911 AD, was a time of immense internal and external crisis for the Byzantines, marked by the rise of Islam, constant warfare, and the tumultuous iconoclasm controversy. The theory suggests that the Byzantine elite had a vested interest in cooperating with the Western powers to synchronize narratives, particularly to legitimize the status of their own dynasties and to establish a unified front against rapidly expanding geopolitical threats. By allowing the West to insert fictitious centuries, the Byzantines could also potentially mask or downplay periods of extreme weakness or devastating military losses in their own history, making their empire appear more resilient and enduring than the historical record, when rigorously examined, suggests. Furthermore, the relationship between the Carolingian dynasty, who fabricated the time, and the Byzantine Empire was complex and often antagonistic. The moment Charlemagne crowned himself emperor in 800 AD, It was an explicit challenge to the sole legitimacy of the Byzantine ruler in Constantinople. However, proponents point to subsequent diplomatic exchanges and treaties as being unusually cooperative, suggesting that the newly aged Western dynasties and the existing Eastern power structure found a shared benefit in the historical modification. By accepting the Carolingian timeline, the Byzantines may have secured crucial strategic alliances or financial assistance, proving that history itself became a commodity traded for political survival. A key point of suspicion lies in the discrepancies in dating methods across the vast Byzantine archives. While the Byzantines often used a different dating system, dating from the supposed creation of the world, Anno Mundi, a close comparison between their records and Western documents reveals significant, often inexplicable synchronization errors that align suspiciously well with the proposed inserted centuries. Critics argue that subsequent Byzantine chroniclers, influenced by a political drive for historical unity with the West, consciously or unconsciously incorporated the fabricated time frame into their own narrative. In essence, the Byzantine Empire, often hailed as the guardian of ancient knowledge, may have been a silent accomplice. Their extensive archives were the perfect tool to validate the fabricated Western timeline, providing the necessary historical depth and apparent continuity needed to transform a massive fraud into universally accepted history. The silence of Constantinople was the price paid for political expediency, solidifying the lie that continues to shape our perception of the Middle Ages today. The financial motive: how the new timeline protected medieval debt and land claims, while the political and religious motivations behind the grand timeline adjustment, namely legitimizing the Carolingian dynasty and solidifying papal authority, parts 3 and 5, are compelling. The conspiracy theorists argue that the ultimate enduring reason for fabricating centuries was fundamentally financial and proprietary. History is not merely a record of battles and kings. It is a meticulously kept ledger of land ownership, dynastic claims, and inherited debt. The insertion of phantom time served as an unparalleled legal and financial shield for the emerging medieval elite. The core financial conspiracy revolves around property rights and prescription. In medieval law, a land claim or a debt obligation could often be extinguished or significantly altered based on the duration of its existence or the length of time a claim was uncontested. By adding several centuries, roughly 300 years, to the historical timeline, the ruling houses, powerful monasteries, and the ancestors of what would become the great banking families gained an immediate, undeniable legal advantage. Consider the complexity of feudal land claims. Many titles, granted centuries earlier, were subject to complex fealty agreements, taxes, and debts. By pushing the historical timeline back, the new Carolingian and Ottonian elites could retroactively age their own land deeds and charters, making their claims appear ancient and beyond legal contestation by any surviving lower-ranking feudal lords or peasant communities. The fabricated centuries essentially created a super statute of limitations, allowing the powerful to wipe the slate clean of inconvenient ancestral debts and solidify ownership over vast, newly claimed territories. Furthermore, the Church, a central actor in the conspiracy, benefited immensely. Monasteries and bishoprics often held vast amounts of land and wealth based on charters, whose authenticity could always be questioned. The creation of the phantom time allowed the papacy and allied religious orders to suddenly possess a historical paper trail stretching back to the earliest days of Christianity's official acceptance in Europe, making their land holdings and the associated tithes and taxes seem divinely sanctioned and historically inevitable. This historical deepening was the financial equivalent of a modern-day corporate mega-merger designed to eliminate inherited liabilities. This concept of historical financial fraud is crucial because it connects the medieval conspiracy directly to the modern day. The land and wealth consolidated and legitimized under the protection of the fabricated timeline formed the foundational capital for many of Europe's most enduring and powerful financial and aristocratic dynasties. The historical lie was not just about making kings look older. It was about ensuring that the wealth accumulated during the historical manipulation became the unquestioned inheritance of the elite bloodlines. allowing them to control commerce and power for the next millennium. The price of history's great lie was paid in property rights, tax revenue, and the unquestioned legal dominion of the few over the many. The modern cover-up: why universities, archivists, and historians defend the phantom time. We have traced the alleged historical fabrication back to its origins in the Carolingian forge and identified the powerful political, religious, and financial motives, parts 3 and 6, that drove the medieval elite to insert phantom time into the historical record. The crucial final question is, if the evidence, archaeological silence, calendar anomalies, and mass document forgery, is so compelling, why does the entire academic world, from universities to national archives, vehemently reject and ridicule the grand timeline adjustment? The proponents argue that the perpetuation of the historical lie in the modern era is maintained not through a centralized, visible conspiracy, but through a vast, decentralized system of institutional inertia and financial dependency. The modern defense of the established timeline is rooted in the fact that the entire academic and political infrastructure is built upon the existing historical framework. Firstly, the financial barrier. Modern universities, research institutions, and archival restoration projects are often dependent on massive governmental and philanthropic funding, much of which is directly or indirectly tied to the same historical and aristocratic structures that benefited from the original fraud. To validate the phantom time hypothesis would mean instantly delegitimizing the historical depth and land claims of countless powerful European institutions, royal houses, and ancient families, the very entities that often fund historical research. Academics who seriously pursue this line of inquiry risk not only their careers, but also the funding streams for their entire departments. Secondly, the complexity of truth. Over a millennium, historians have constructed an incredibly complex, interwoven narrative to fill the gaps created by the initial fraud. Millions of books, university courses, and cultural identities are now based on the accepted timeline. To tear out 300 years would require the wholesale rewriting of virtually all European history, an intellectual task so daunting and disruptive that most academics instinctively reject it to preserve their life's work and the integrity of their field. The consensus becomes a matter of professional survival, not intellectual honesty. Thirdly, the preservation of the status quo. The official timeline creates a tidy, logical progression that ends precisely where the modern nation-states and global power structures begin. The phantom time hypothesis suggests that the rise of modern capitalism and political boundaries is built on a massive lie about legitimacy and continuity. Global elites, governments, and educational systems rely on this perceived historical lineage to maintain public faith in their authority. Questioning the timeline is seen not merely as questioning history, but as questioning the fundamental legal and cultural foundations of the modern world. In conclusion, the grand timeline adjustment is a theory that exposes how the ultimate power lies in controlling the past. The medieval elites created the past they needed to secure financial and political dominion. The modern institutions, driven by careerism, funding dependencies, and the need for global stability, act as the unwitting or compliant archivists of that original deception. The silence of the universities on this issue is, for the proponents, the final, chilling evidence that the global power structure will stop at nothing to ensure that the millennium they stole remains forever a phantom time.